All right, we're just gonna wait a couple more minutes here for some more people to join. Won't delay too long though, because we're very grateful that you're all on time. Okay. Thank you everyone for being here this evening. This is the Rain Ready Ottawa webinar on planning and planting a rain garden. I'll be guiding me through this webinar today. My name is Steph. I work for Enviro Center as a project lead, working on a lot of rain and green infrastructure projects. And with me today is my colleague Stefan, who also works on so many different projects in this realm. And Stefan will be my tech support and also second brain to answer any questions that pop up in the chat. So please feel free to throw some questions in there as we go through the webinar. Um, a few little housekeeping things. This webinar is being recorded. We're doing 4 of these webinars throughout July and August, and once they are completed, we will be sending all of the participants in all of the webinars a link to the recordings as well as the presentations and the presentations in French. You can feel free to ask questions in either official language. We can try to do our best to answer questions in French, but this presentation will be in English. And I believe that's everything on my list. There'll be an opportunity for some questions and answers as well at the end. All right. I wonder if this is gonna let me advance my slide or not. There we go. All right. Wanted to begin by acknowledging that the land where we live, gather, and work here in Ottawa is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Since time immemorial, the Algonquin people have lived here. We are proud and grateful to call it our home, and we endeavor to work respectfully with the land and its people. I find this especially salient talking about issues with water and stewarding our waterways in a responsible way, as the first peoples here have done since time immemorial. A little bit of an overview of what you will learn in this webinar. So we're going to talk about some key information about the Rain Ready Ottawa program, how to identify the best location to install a rain garden on your property, how to assess and amend your soil, and how to design, install, and maintain a rain garden. If you've come as far as this webinar, you probably have a bit of an idea what Rain Ready Ottawa is, but if you're unfamiliar, it's a City of Ottawa program that encourages and supports residents to take action on their property to reduce the harmful impacts of rainwater runoff. In terms of what it offers information on projects for your home, including a series of self-guided e-learning courses to help you implement rainwater management projects. It also offers rebates up to $5,000 to help you install these practices if you live in priority areas. If you are interested or if you don't know if you're in a priority area, you can go to the Rain Ready Ottawa website. It's ottawa.ca/rain. And there is a eligibility form where you can put in your address and you can right away see if you are in an eligible area or not. The rebates cover 5 different sort of streams. Downspout redirection, rain garden installation, which is obviously the topic of today's webinar, soak pit installation, permeable pavement, and certified landscape design through a Fusion landscape professional. So as we go through this, I guess a good precursor to the rest of the webinar is that if you're interested in installing a rain garden, you have 2 options. You can either do it yourself and go through do the e-learning course and get a lot of information there, or work with a Fusion landscape professional and they will do the whole thing for you. So depending on how involved you want to be in the process, those are your 2 streams. An important note before you begin, rebates are not retroactive. So you need to submit an online application and have your project approved before you start constructing it. That being said, if you have started to look into this, maybe you've had a quote or done a little bit of work, it is still worth reaching out to the city to let them know where you are at in the process, and hopefully they can find a way to still enroll you in this program if you're quite keen. I also wanted to make sure we all understood some key terms. So, stormwater runoff is precipitation, like rain or melting snow that runs off of surfaces like roofs and roads that are impermeable instead of soaking into the ground. And throughout this presentation and in the Rain Ready Ottawa program, we refer to directly connected impervious areas. A shorthand for that is DCIA, which is the portion of impervious surfaces, so like those roads and driveways, in an urban area that directly drain into a storm sewer system or a natural body of water without first flowing over any pervious land. So if water is coming straight from your roof onto your driveway into the storm sewer, the roof or the driveway would be a directly connected impervious area. So what's a rain garden? A rain garden is a really unique and interesting type of garden, um, a low impact development feature that is designed to allow rainwater to infiltrate into the ground and evaporate into the air instead of running off as, running off as surface water. A key component of a rain garden is that it has a shallow bowl shape. So it's lower in the center of the garden. It's got a bit of a depressed spot with higher sides. There are loose, deep soils in a garden to help absorption. It is planted with native plants that can withstand both flood conditions and drought conditions. And there's a thick layer of mulch that helps retain both the soil and the moisture throughout some of the drier months. Why does the city care about rain gardens? Rain gardens are really good for allowing rainwater to infiltrate into the ground. Compared to a traditional turf lawn, they absorb about 30% more water. They reduce the amount of rainwater that enters storm sewers. When water enters the storm sewers, it almost always flows directly into creeks and rivers in our area without any treatment. So if there's any oil or dog poo or anything that you wouldn't want to be swimming with on the streets, that water is going directly into our rivers, and we can improve the quality of the water in our rivers and other water bodies by trying to reduce the amount of storm water that's running off. Similarly, it reduces pollutants that enter our waterways. They're beautiful. They enhance the aesthetic appeal of properties. They feature low maintenance plants, which are really great if you don't have a super green thumb or it's not how you want to spend all of your time. And they provide great habitat for pollinators and other wildlife like birds. So for the structure of a rain garden, you have a few required elements. You need to have a water source. So a rain garden can be fed by the rain, but for the purpose of the Rain Ready Ottawa rebates, you're going to want to have it connected to a DCIA, that directly connected impervious area, that's feeding into a rain garden, so it's capturing some of that water. Most often that's going to be a downspout, but it could also be a sump pump overflow or an outflow. It could be your driveway. You could have it so the water is flowing off your driveway and into a rain garden. But a downspout is generally the most common. You're going to want an erosion-proof entry point for the rain. So what that usually looks like is a patch of river stone or just rocks, pebbles, anything that's going to slow down the water a little bit as it enters the rain garden so that it's not washing away dirt and mulch. It's going to have that distinct bowl-like shape. So there's a little bit of like a cup shape in the middle that will allow the water to, will hold the water while it flows in instead of just flowing right off of it. And you need an overflow area. So what that means is that in a really heavy rainfall event, if there's more water than the rain garden can take, there should be somewhere that the water can flow out of this bowl structure. Ideally, you have kind of a channel out instead of it just loosely overflowing. So the steps for pursuing a rain garden, you're first going to want to complete the e-learning course or get a quote from a Fusion landscape professional. And I should say that first step is just if you're looking to get a rebate for this through the Rain Ready Ottawa program. All of the information that's offered through Rain Ready Ottawa is available to any resident of Ottawa. So if you're just here because you're curious and want to learn more, then welcome. And if you're here because you want to pursue one of these to get a rebate, welcome also, but that will be your first step. From there, you're going to select a location, assess the soil, design the rain garden to fit your situation, plant it or implement it, and do the ongoing maintenance. So we're going to go through all of these steps in further detail. First things first, you're going to want to decide where you're going to put this. So it needs to be a permeable area, ideally a lawn or maybe a garden bed that's being underutilized. It needs to be where water is draining. So, like I mentioned before, a downspout where a sump pump would outflow, your driveway, somewhere where it is taking care of some of the water coming off of an impervious surface. You want it to be a space that's not currently in use. What that means is if you have kids or pets or maybe people in your neighborhood crossing across your lawn, you don't want to put it in a spot that is going to set it up to be trampled over or make it sort of your dog's favorite spot to use the use the bathroom. You want to try to find a spot where it's going to be protected and hopefully appreciated. You want your downspout to outflow 3 or more meters away from any foundation. That is really critical to make sure that your basement is flooding and make sure that you're not getting any water going down, cracking your foundation, causing any big and expensive issues. You are going to also determine the size based on the DCIA. So we'll go further into that, but the way that this rebate is calculated and the way that you design a rain garden is based on the area that is of area of water that's flowing into it. And so important is that you need to order underground locates from Ontario One Call before you get too excited about any location, because you don't want to get really invested in the design and then find out that there's a hydro line or a gas main right below the surface of where you want it to be. So like I mentioned, you want to avoid putting one over buried utilities. You need to call before you dig. It's the law. You don't want to put it on top of a septic bed. You don't want to put a rain garden uphill from your home because in the event that it overflows, it's going to be coming right down towards that foundation of yours. You don't want it behind a retaining wall or in areas with slopes greater than 30 degrees. They don't do super well on a hill or on a relatively steep hill. And you don't want them too close to trees. You could damage the roots of the trees if you have them too close to that. There are also some bylaws in Ottawa to consider. Things like site alteration, zoning, road activity, all of these bylaws, I'm not an expert in, but the people who are experts in these are the people at 311. So you can give them a call or go to their website and they can give you information that's specific to your property. All right. So once you have a location in mind, the next thing that you're going to do is figure out how big it needs to be. So the size of your rain garden should be between 10 and 20% of the area that generates the runoff that's going to be going into the garden. So that, again, is that DCIA. So let's say a portion of your roof is going to be flowing into the rain garden, and that roof area is 320 feet squared. So your garden would be between 32 and 64 feet squared. If you have poorly draining soil, you're going to want to have a rain garden on the larger end of that spectrum, so up to 20%. If you have sandy soil that's well draining, you can get away with a smaller garden of about 10%, and it's still going to meet those functions of absorbing a lot of the water coming off of that DCIA. The rebates for the rain garden rebate stream in Rain Ready Ottawa are calculated at 75 feet per square meter of rain garden. And it cannot exceed 20% of the directly connected impervious areas. So if it's coming off of a portion of your roof, like in the previous example, it couldn't be more than 20% of the total area that it's feeding into. And then rain gardens and soakaway pits are subject to a combined maximum rebate of $2,500. So if you don't know how big your roof is, like most of us don't, there's really easy ways to measure that or to get a rough estimate of it from Google Maps or Google Earth. In one of the webinars, the DIY stormwater assessment webinar that perhaps some of you attended, my colleague Stefan went over how to do that. You can also find some tutorials online, but you're just going to be using the measure function. And it's worth noting that it's usually not going to be your entire roof area that's draining into into a rain garden unless you just have one downspout for your entire roof. Most often it's just going to be, excuse me, a certain pitch or portion of your roof. So again, refer back to the the DIY stormwater assessment recording that we will be sending out if you'd like more information on this. Just gonna grab a sip of water. All right. Next up is a step that some people find very intimidating, and it shouldn't be, because it is very manageable. So you're going to assess your soil to figure out what type of soil you're working with. Excuse me. Of course, when you're giving a webinar, you get a tickle in your throat. That is the way of the world. So there's a few different types of tests that you can do to assess your soil. The one that's being pictured here is a percolation test, which essentially involves digging a hole to a specific depth, pouring water in, letting it soak through, pouring water in again, and then measuring the rate at which it gets absorbed into the earth. There's also a mason jar soil texture test. Got a photo of that in the next slide. You grab some dirt, you put it in a jar with some water and a touch of dish soap, shake it up, and then let it all settle. And you measure the proportion of each soil type that forms in layers. There's also a ribbon test where you would grab a wet handful of soil and smush it in your fingers and see how long of a little like ribbon, so to speak, of soil that you can make before it crumbles. All of these are very standard tests that you can find great YouTube tutorials of, or yeah, sort of instructional steps online. I say that because if I explain them all in detail, you're probably still going to want to go back and watch it right before you do the test. There's also YouTube links to those tests in the e-learning course. So that's another place to follow up there. I believe Stefan also has some of those links that he can put directly into the chat.
Yes,
Once you figure
I
out,
just put those in there for everybody.
okay, perfect. Thank you. I can't really see the chat too much. Um, so once you figure out what type of soil you have, yeah, that will help you determine what sort of soil amendments you're going to want to add. So a soil amendment would be something like compost, sand, or topsoil. Those are the main ones that are almost always going to be used for a rain garden. The ideal ratio, it varies a bit, but it's about 50% sand, 25% topsoil, and 25% compost. That is a really great mix to make sure that this soil has all the nutrients the plants are going to need to survive while still being really, really fluffy and porous and allowing the water to percolate in easily. As well, the compost is going to be retaining a bit of moisture so that in those drier times, especially in the summer, like in the period we've just been having, it's able to retain a bit of moisture so those plants aren't just totally drying up. As I mentioned, that's a photo of the mason jar test where you're just putting water in and seeing how the different layers settle. A lot of Ottawa has clay soil. And unfortunately, with clay soil, you may have to remove it from the rain garden area because it is very difficult to get water to percolate through it. It's also not recommended to add sand to clay soil, which is what you might think. I think the first time I was reading this, I intuitively thought you would add sand, but unfortunately, it forms a sort of concrete-like mixture that is even more difficult to work with than the clay on its own. So what you're probably going to want to do is replace the topsoil with, replace the clay with some topsoil amended with sand and compost to the ratio on the last slide. Also, I would recommend before you start digging to have in mind what you're going to do with the excess clay soil that you take out, because otherwise you're going to have a big pile and still going to have to put it somewhere. You can use it to create a bit of a berm or sort of a buffer around your rain garden to further accentuate that bowl shape and hold the water in. You could regrade parts of your property if you've got sort of a shallow area, or if your your lawn is sloping towards your house instead of away from it. That's could be a potential use. Regrading that. You could also mix it into some planters. There's some options for it, but I would recommend having a plan for it before you start digging.
We
And
actually have a
then,
really good question here pertaining to this.
oh, sure.
What type of sand is used for amending soil? I know there's a lot of, if it's just
Yeah,
like play structure sand, I'm guessing not, but where
yeah, you
someone
could
make,
use that. Any
yeah.
sort of washed sand would be fine. You can find the appropriate type of sand at most hardware stores. I would recommend, yeah, washed or playground sand. Also, any of the big, what would you call those? The companies around here that offer mulch and topsoil, that sort of stuff. If you're getting enough of it, it may make sense to have it delivered from a company like that. Um, but yeah, sand is more or less sand. So I would say whatever is economical and readily available will probably work fine.
Perfect.
And then if you're so lucky as to have sandy soil to begin with, you can just add some compost and or topsoil to improve the water retention. And again, that's for those long dry spots in the summer, so those plants don't need too much extra outside watering. Then this is my favorite part, the choosing plants aspect of it. There are so many beautiful native plants that you can choose from. And there's so many options that will hopefully fit every property type. So, a few things to think about when you're choosing plants. Consider the size of the fully grown plants. So, oftentimes when we're planting rain gardens, on the actual day of planting, they look a little sparse. You're like, oh, these plants are a bit small. But that's because we're not planting them too densely right when they're little. We want to give space for them to grow into their full, beautiful selves. Another really fun aspect is you can decide what you would like to attract. So if you're someone who's interested in nature or bird watching, you want to support pollinators or butterflies, you can look up, there's oftentimes plants that support really specific species. So maybe you're familiar with the way that monarchs rely on milkweed. There's lots of different types of butterflies and other pollinators that rely on specific plants. So that can be a fun thing to think about what you would like to attract to your yard. I would also strongly recommend choosing native plants that flower throughout the season or have winter interest. So not every plant needs to flower the entire season, but if you have some that are flowering in the spring, some in the summer, some in the fall, and even something like a dogwood that has beautiful red branches and is gorgeous in the winter, even when it doesn't have leaves, that will make the rain garden an attractive part of your property, no matter the season. You also want to take into account the sun exposure in your planting area. So you can plant rain gardens in full sun, you can plant them in full shade. You're going to find a native plant that's going to do well in either of those, but you want to make sure you have the right plant for the conditions that you have on your property. And then when you start to go into a bit more of the design part, you can have it be, it's up to you if you want to design your rain garden to be a bit more wild, sort of English country cottage vibe, or more formal and structured. And then just a design principle tidbit you could choose to follow or not is oftentimes visually it looks really good when you choose plants. You plant them in groups of three. So maybe three plants from the same species next to each other. It just forms that natural sort of clumping thing that the eye really likes. We have a sample rain garden plant that we will distribute, and we can again put that in the email that we sent out to everyone who registers for this. But a local landscaping company has been so kind as to put together this list of shrubs, grasses, trees, ferns that are native to this area and that are readily available and do well in these. So you'll see it has the botanical name, common name, the size when it's fully grown. And then if you look at the seasonal bloom chart, this area, if you can see my cursor, it has a letter for the month, May through November, where it might be flowering. And then the color corresponds to the color of flower that you could expect. It also has some information about whether it's shade tolerant and whether it has some color in the fall. So that will be sent out. And that same handout, the same sample rain garden plan has a little schematic or a few little drawings of how you might want to lay out your rain garden. By no means feel like you have to follow this, but again, this is kind of following that design aesthetic of having species in little clumps with each other and trying to plan from the beginning how big the plants are going to be when they're fully grown. All right, you've gone through all of the planning stages, you're ready to go. So we're again going to go through all of these steps individually, but the next thing you're going to do is implement your rain garden. So you're going to mark the area with stringer paint, you're going to dig down and backfill, create an inlet and outlet, add plants and mulch, and then eventually water the plants and start to watch them grow. So for the first couple steps here, you're going to want to mark the area with painter's string. So in the photo on the left, you can see there's a little bit of marking paint, the same paint that you would use to mark like a playing field of some sort. That can be really helpful because once you get going, it can be a little hard to remember exactly what the boundary looked like. Um, and I would recommend if you're doing this yourself, a simple piece of equipment that you can rent fairly cheaply that will make your life a lot easier is a sod ripper. You can, which the machinery that's pictured in that photo, you can get those from any of the big hardware stores that rent machinery. So, um, yeah, follow all recommended safety precautions, but that can be something that can really speed up the process of removing all the sod. You're then going to want to dig down to create um, that classic bowl shape of a rain garden. So this is something that you can do manually or with a machine. Um, and I have total respect for you if you decide to go either way. Manually, it can be quite laborious because you're going to want to go down almost a full meter, about 85 centimeters. Um, you could decide to hire someone just for this part of the process, just to come with a small backhoe or earth mover and dig that hole out for you. Um, Either way, once you have it pulled out, you're gonna backfill it with about 60 centimeters of the that soil mix, the compost topsoil sand mix. So that if you're doing quick mental math, that will leave you with about 25 centimeters um, of depression from the edges of the rain garden down to the lowest part. You're then going to want to create the inlet and outlet. So, as I mentioned in the earlier slides, you're going to want your downspout or sump pump overflow, wherever it is, to have a little bit of a place to slow down before it enters the rain garden. So in these examples, we've added some river stone. And in the example on the left, you can also see that we've added an impervious liner to that portion. So that is a way if your downspout isn't already 3 meters away from your house that you can sort of buy a little bit of that space. Because if you create the impervious liner and you have appropriate grading, so it's sloping away from where the water is entering, then that will act as a further extension of your downspout and making sure that that water is getting at least 3 meters away from your foundation. And next is a very joyous step of adding plants. Um, so I would always consider or recommend considering positioning all the plants out in their pots before you start digging to finalize the spacing and layout. You are then gonna, yeah, call some of your friends, do it yourself, however it works, and put the plants in the ground. You are then going to follow that by adding around 2 to 4 inches of mulch to sort of tuck them in after they're planting. Next up, you're going to water the plants. And really, the first watering when you're planting anything is the most important. It makes sure that, or it ensures that the roots have contact with the soil and can get established. Um, Once you plant the rain garden, you're also going to want to water it probably for the first month while the roots are getting established. And then after that, it really shouldn't take too much more water. It should be fine with the DCIA flowing into it, and you'll only really need to water it in times of extreme drought. So what does the maintenance look like after that? Well, in spring, you're going to want to clear out any debris that's wandered in. If you have, let's say, trash or recycling that has flown in over the winter, keep an eye out for any plants that didn't make it through the winter and might need replacement. Working with native plants, you shouldn't have too much of that, but it is always a possibility. And then reapply mulch as needed. The mulch will naturally get broken down and pulled into the soil over time. So to continue to have that insulating effect that mulch does of holding moisture in, it's good to add a little bit more every few years so you keep between 2 and 4 inches on the top of the soil. In the summer, you may occasionally need to water in times of prolonged drought. So I'm not sure exactly what the objective measurement of prolonged drought is, but I would say probably anytime it hasn't rained in like 10 days to 2 weeks, you're getting into that drought category. And then it's really up to you to observe and see if the plants are still looking fine or if they're starting to wilt, they're starting to get a little crispy. That might be a time you would water. But otherwise, especially once the gardens are uh, mature, then they should be mostly fine. You can also weed as required. So most of these plants will be able to outcompete some weeds, but obviously it might look a little bit neater if you decide to weed. And especially, again, as they're getting established, that's a great time to give them a little bit of a leg up by not having to compete with other weeds. I would also recommend familiarizing yourself with invasive plants in your area and trying to keep those out, no matter how old the garden is, because invasives will often take over something like this if they're allowed to really get a foothold in there. And then a great thing about rain gardens being the low maintenance gardens that they are is that there's no need to fertilize. These are all native plants that are oftentimes adapted to really poor soil. So once we put them in this, they are like happy as clams and do not need further fertilization. Um, Also, if you fertilize and it's running off in any way, that's actually further contributing to the water quality degradation that we're trying to prevent. So I'd strongly recommend against fertilizing your rain garden. And then in fall and winter, you can save the seeds or save the seeds with the intention to plant them either somewhere else on your property or maybe give them to a friend. Or you can leave the plants standing. Oftentimes birds, it's a favorite food of birds, the seeds from native plants that are still standing up in the winter, they will snap right on those. So if you're interested in supporting wildlife, that would be a great approach. And then you can allow the leaves to enter, like any leaves that fall in the rain garden, you can absolutely feel free to leave them there. It's essentially free mulch. It's nature's mulch. They will just break down eventually in the garden, and they will add an extra insulating protective factor, so the roots stay a little bit warmer throughout the winter and are exposed to less of an extreme freeze thaw. Some good signs to look out for. You want the water to be standing in the rain garden for about 48 hours or less. So a common misconception with rain gardens is that they will immediately soak up all of the water. And there's two things I would say to that. One is that it's normal for the water to stay in that little shallow depression for up to 48 hours afterwards. That's what they're designed for. You're allowing it to slowly percolate into the ground, so it's not going to immediately just disappear. Um, Also, rain gardens, the 10 to 20% ratio of the directly connected impervious area, that is based on what would be sort of a typical storm in Ontario. So a storm that you would expect to see every year. Um, Increasingly, because of climate change, we're seeing extreme weather events where you may get a storm that would be, maybe you've heard the term like a 1 in 10 year, 1 in 50 year, 1 in 100-year storm. Those are storms we would expect to see only 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 years. So a storm of that category is going to overflow the rain garden. Um, so don't be too shocked if we have record-breaking rainfall. Your garden will probably not be able to absorb all of it. But if you have an appropriate placed outflow, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. It's just going to flow right on out. Um, and 48 hours later, it should be mostly absorbed. You're also going to be wanting to see thriving plants, even in short droughts. So these plants should be fine with no water for, up to a couple weeks or longer, depending on the specific plant. And ideally, you're not going to have any bare patches. So if you find that something really doesn't get on in your garden and maybe there's a whole, like one species just all drops, I would recommend replacing it with something else. It's probably there's something that's beyond the naked eye that is inhibiting it from growing really well in that particular location. But in general, if the entire garden is really flourishing, if the water is getting absorbed, if things are looking good, you've done your job perfectly. And now you can just, yeah, water it as needed, pull some weeds or invasives if uh, you see any, and just enjoy this beautiful low maintenance garden. If you want some inspiration of rain gardens that are already existing in the Ottawa area, um, through Rain Ready Ottawa, we've planted, I believe, four now, with an additional three upcoming this fall. So one of our earliest ones was at Manordale Park off of Knoxdale Road. So this was planted in 2021. It is really thriving. Another in the East End is the Aquaview Community Hall off Aquaview Drive. It was planted in 2023, and this is actually an older photo, but it has gotten even bigger since then. So these are great to sort of get an idea of maybe some species that you'd like to put in your garden. Um, Also, all of the gardens that have been planted through Rain Ready Ottawa have these interactive signs. So if you have um, someone in your life who's maybe young or just loves science, you can bring a little water bottle and pour water into the top of the sign's downspout, and then it will go through and show how it trickles and percolates in. So that's kind of a fun bonus. Wrapping up, before you go, you're going to want to identify your location, go through the location criteria, make sure that you are calling Ontario One Call beforehand to make sure you're not going to have a real surprise hitting some piece of buried underground infrastructure. You're going to want to assess your soil and determine what type you have and how that's going to impact the type of um, amendments you're going to be adding. Design it so that you have interest all year round if you can. Um, Make sure that you are choosing species that you like to look at because they're going to be in your garden for a long time to come, hopefully. And something that you'll feel really, yeah, happy and excited to look at. You are also then going to want to, yeah, get your hands in the dirt, implement it, either dig down yourself and get that bowl shape or hire someone for all or part of the process, and then maintain it. Like I said, it shouldn't be too much maintenance, but it is nice to have someone looking out for it, getting it through those really dry parts of the summer and pulling in really competitive weeds. And that is it for rain gardens. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I mean, you can either ask them now, or if you have questions that crop up in the future, you can reach out to us at Enviro Center at Green City at envirocenter.ca. I'm sure Stefan can pop that in the chat if he hasn't already, or rain at ottawa.ca. We have one more upcoming workshop in this sort of mini series of four. It's going to be taking place on Wednesday, August 27th at 7 p.m. It's an Ask an Expert session with about permeable pavement with a landscape architect who has been in this business for a long time and literally teaches the course on permeable pavement in the Fusion Landscape Design program. So that will be really interesting and is one that people always have lots of questions on, especially in this climate and context. So we hope to see you there.
We do actually have some a question here. I also realized that
Perfect.
I had put some links in, but it was just to the host. So I think
Okay.
you already know all of those, so I'm gonna reshare those for everybody. But
Okay.
yeah, the question was just, can you show or explain more about the outflow part of the design? It's like that overflow kind of
hmm
element.
Yeah, I didn't have a great photo of one for this. But let's say even in can you see where my cursor is on the screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So in this even just like little diagram here, you've got the inflow over here, and you can sort of imagine this is aiming to show that the water is being absorbed into the ground. And the little rocks over here would be kind of what you would imagine as the outflow. So let's say you make a bit of a berm, you use some of the extra soil to make a raised sort of edge around the downspout. If you don't put an outflow, that's just going to be a big cup. But if you have an outflow, you would have a little bit of that is just level with the rest of the ground. It's not built up. And that would be the low spot where that would overflow. So I hope that makes sense without a better diagram. But you want it to be if the rain garden totally fills up, if that cup is overflowing, then you want it to give it a spot that's going to be easy for it to flow out and flow away from your foundation and ideally onto a permeable surface. So to flow out of the rain garden onto your lawn, downhill, away from your house, so it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, I always think of it like it's like a bowl with a spout. Like so if your bowl was to overflow, instead of overflowing in every direction at the same time once it hits that, the peak of the bowl, it would just flow out of that one spout area. So you can kind of just by adding one kind of depressed area around the edge, control where that water would be overflowing to, so it's not flowing where you don't want it to go.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It was almost like a measuring cup, one of those like glass measuring cups that has, yeah, the little part where you would pour from, just giving it an easy out in the right direction.
Awesome.
Are
That's the only
there any other
question.
questions?
That's the only question
Okay,
right
fair.
now. If I'll let you know if any others pop up there.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. Again, if you have any questions at all during the planning or planting process, you can reach out to rain@ottawa.ca. They're really helpful specifically with the rebate aspect of it. And then greencity@envirocenter.ca. We're happy to answer any of your questions about the design or implementation. Honestly, we're just nerds. We're happy to talk about them. So if you have any ideas and you want to run them past someone, feel free to reach out. And unless there are any other questions, I think we can finish up a few minutes early and give you back the rest of your evening. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we see you at that next one in a couple of weeks. Take care, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks.